Hi, welcome back. I'm Jeff. I talked a little bit about how we solve the app virtualization technology with app volumes and apps on demand. I want to talk a little bit more about how we're using that technology for published apps. As we dive into some of the challenges around published apps, specifically around Horizon apps and Citrix virtual apps, as well as some of the cloud technologies there as well, like Azure Virtual Desktops, remote apps, and Amazon's App Stream. So there's some challenges that come from being able to work in those technologies. One of the things that we've noticed is that you have these machines, and I've drawn examples of what we call silos or farms at VMware, or delivery groups in Citrix. But the idea is that these machines, pools of these machines are created for the capability of, and I'll just make them pools here, for the capability of hosting users in multiple sessions. And on these machines, what you'll see is they'll typically be, again, those applications that are baked into the operating system, and these applications will be typically sectioned. It's often called app rationalization, which means these applications are put on the machines in gold images, and these different gold images will have different applications that are on them. And often what happens is you'll even have the same application appearing multiple times in different farms for the sake of being able to have those applications available on the same server. Now, one of the challenges that you'll find around these is the infrastructure management challenge. Because you have these applications baked into these images, you'll have these individual silos, which means that they'll be potentially underutilized. So you'll see, like, at peak time, you'll scale this environment, you'll buy all the servers or get all the resources to be able to handle it. But in times where they're not completely utilized, they'll run empty. And so that's a cost to the business, and that actually, as you scale out, and that's been one of the biggest challenges around remote apps, is being able to scale out. In my opinion, remote apps is actually a better technology because it allows you to get the app straight to the user without having an additional desktop. So while I'm on my physical endpoint, I can get a secure remote app right there in that actual endpoint device. With VDI technologies, we often, users will need a full desktop. And part of the reason we've done that is because of this management challenge of having to manage these servers that stream the apps down to the machine. It's easier sometimes just to give them a desktop and let them install what they need to. But in the case of wanting to give users apps, the second challenge there is entitlements. So if you have your users over here that are running these, that are needing these apps, you're trying to figure out, okay, so I'm going to have this user getting this app over here, but maybe I need to give them this other app because they need both this app and they need this app. At least that's what they think they need. But then later on, they're like, actually, no, wait, I need this other app. And so, wait, do I assign it to this server? Or do I come down to this server? Well, do these apps need to work together? Do they need to share information? No, these apps. So now you're starting to see, like, some of the challenge of the admin is trying to figure out how do they do this. And as they add more users to these use cases, guess what? You got to buy more hardware. So back again to that challenge of how do you manage how much infrastructure you have in order to be able to manage this. So there's a lot of challenges that come from scale with published apps, and that's because of the users, right? The ones that are actually needing these apps. And in all reality, these users actually change, right? The users' usage or needs of these apps change, and sometimes daily. And so it's really challenging if you need to be able to get a group of users onto a machine, and then you find out you don't have the infrastructure for that. So we'll talk a little bit later on how we've addressed that, but in the meantime, I want to talk about the third challenge. So I've talked about how you've got the infrastructure. I've talked about the entitlement complexity and figuring out which farms to assign to different users and which apps. But then also the third piece is lifecycle management, because not only are the users changing the apps that they need and figuring out that they need different apps from a day-to-day basis, but also the apps are changing from the vendor. And IT is often playing the role of in between the vendor and the user for that app. The vendor's telling you this app's no longer supported, this version of this app is no longer supported. They're telling you need to get the new version. Well, typically what will happen is then you have to update the image on this machine. And that means in order for these users to get the new version of the application, you have to boot them off, restart the machines, restart the images, make changes. And you can imagine as you're making those changes, you start to have to coordinate, and there's a lot of activities that go around coordinating them. You're not just easily able to update one app at a time as these, especially some of these critical CVEs come out that need to be updated. Now, one of the things that is really key here is that not only are you updating these apps, but a lot of times you have to unupdate. You have to roll back these changes. And if you roll something out, it's something that can be very, very challenging. So we'll talk a little bit about how we solve that problem as well with our capabilities around lifecycle management. So I've talked a little bit about the problem. I've talked a little bit about how we solve the application, how we solve the app virtualization challenges with apps on demand. Also talked about the challenges that come from published apps as a technology beyond the desktop and VDI. Let's talk a little bit about how we've evolved published apps with apps on demand. And this allows us to be able to improve the way admins manage those applications and those particular technologies. So first off, as we look at what we have here, the first problem we talked about was the infrastructure. So let's say instead of having all of these individual silos, remember with the technology we talked about before, we can actually bring those applications to the machine as users need it. So if we scaled that out on a server with multiple users, theoretically we can bring in those applications exactly when the users need them. So let's talk a little bit about what that might look like. And actually, I'm going to draw it a little bit different than here. Instead of these being sessions that are part of the same machine, I'm going to show them as being a bit isolated from each other. And that's pretty important because the technology that we have allows us to do some things that defy the laws of physics in Windows. So for example, I have a user, one of these users that logs into this machine, and I'm going to say this user over here, this user over here, and this user over here. So now we're actually giving the users individual sessions, just like we might do on VDI, but they're on the same Windows server. And so as users need an app, let's say this user needs an app, we'll bring that application to this machine. And if they need another app, we'll bring that application to the machine and virtualize it in their session. And let's say another user needs an app, different app. We'll bring that application to the session. And so what you're seeing here is that I've got these applications that the users are requesting, and then the applications are coming to the machine. Let's say they need another app, but it's already one that's available on the machine, then it'll just use that application. So this technology allows us to be able to deliver applications to the machine, and every user gets their own session dedicated for them. Now the scale capabilities that we were talking about before, we're able to scale out based on user need instead of actually based on app plus user need. So it really gives us this capability to not have to app rationalize and figure out where all these apps are going to go, but instead just allow the environment to scale as there's usage of that. And obviously in the cloud, as we talk about bursting and the capabilities around bursting applications, this becomes even more attractive where you're effectively renting these servers and scaling out as you need to. Now let's talk a little bit more about, we've talked about the way we can handle the infrastructure, collapsing those silos and being able to use infrastructure effectively. We've talked about the entitlements. Now you're just entitling the apps that the users need and being able to get them on demand for the user in their own Windows session and a multi-session server. Let's talk a little bit about how we can actually update an application with lifecycle management. We mentioned that there's some challenges that come from doing lifecycle management. And I can think back to a time when I was in IT, and we rolled out, and I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but we rolled out Windows, and this was a new version of Windows. We distributed the laptops. They were imaged, ready to go. We spent a bunch of time testing. We rolled out Office, and Office worked great. We tested it. We did all the testing. And when we rolled it out, Office had made a change to include a ribbon, and they had little pictures. That ribbon exists today, but they've brought back the file menu, because one of the things in the first release where there was no file menu, all of the ways that the company operated through standard operating procedures, they were using the file tools menu, they had all these procedures written, and what happened is we rolled out all these laptops and manufacturing stopped. And that was very expensive for our company, and we didn't have any way to easily just undo or roll back that change. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, how we make that better. So being able to update those applications and then being able to roll back is something that we've solved as well. So if we talk about the types of an application, we'll take an application. We'll just use this A up here for application. The way we've organized it in our inventory is there'll be an application A, and then you'll have the different packages that represent the different versions. So let's say we have A1, and we'll just make this one, let's just make this A1 down here. And users are using A1 to do their day-to-day business. And so if I come in, we'll say this is a published app, and this app's been published. We have 4 lifecycle stages in the product now: new, tested, published, retired. And those are really just ways for you to mark those particular packages as you go through your standard lifecycle of testing and bringing them through and being able to indicate the maturity of that package. And then as far as the package goes, we have also the capability of using what's called a marker. And so I'm going to mark this as current. And so in this current marker, this tells us which version of the application, or which package representing that version of the application is the one that users get when they log in, or more importantly, in Apps on Demand, when they click that application. Because of the way we do Apps on Demand, we don't have to determine the version until the actual time they run the application. So we can get that actual version to them at that time. So let's say that we've got the users logged in here, and they're getting this application A1. Now I've got a critical update that has to come out. It's a CVE that's available. I have to get it out today. No problem. I go ahead and I quickly run this through, and I could roll it out in any part of the life cycle, but let's just flip this one to published. We're ready to go. We're going to roll this out. Now all I have to do to make a change at just the app level throughout all my organization, this could be on 5 machines if I want to, 5 users if I want to, or I can do it across 10,000 users, 100,000 users, just at the flip of a switch. So I mark this A2 as the current version, and so that will allow me to move this marker to this new version, current. And that will basically make it so that A2 is now the current version. Now the great part here is that will allow me to have this third user that's logging in. If they're logging in after I've moved that change and they click on the A application to launch it, they're going to get A2. And that's because we'll bring a second copy, and this is where we really defy the laws of physics. 2 objects normally cannot occupy the same place at the same time. We know on the freeway that doesn't work, right? But definitely, if you look here on this particular system, that's possible because the actual bits don't exist on the C drive of that application, even though the operating system for this user sees the C drive program files as the A1 version, and this user sees it as C program files for the A2 version. Same executable, same location, and is able to run that on the same Windows machine. And so now this is really, really powerful because now we can evolve this server over time. And so as this user logs in, as the next user logs in, as they log on different servers within your scaled infrastructure, A2 is now the version that everybody's getting. When this user finishes working for the day or finishes working for their session, this session is then recycled, and then the next time that user logs in, they'll get A2 as well. Now what happens if I had that scenario where I've rolled out this change and manufacturing comes to a halt? That's not a problem because rolling a version back is the same as rolling it forward. We just move the marker back to A1, and then the next user that asks for that application will get A1. And so we're able to roll forward and roll back and handle the life cycle of these applications on an app-by-app basis, delivering them to whichever server they need as users need them. So today we've talked about how we solve the app virtualization with apps on demand. We've talked about how we handle the challenges that come from these different areas, and we've discussed, the idea of infrastructure being a problem, entitlement being a problem, and then lifecycle management being a problem. And then we've shown how with the apps on demand technology, alongside these solutions like Horizon Apps and Citrix Virtual Apps, we're able to improve and evolve those servers and overall provide a much better solution. So I really appreciate your time today, and I hope this was very helpful for you to be able to improve your published apps environments as well.